Before I even say the words Sports Illustrated, I need to establish something. One, I am not a journalist. I'm not an insider. I do not have a press badge. I'm a fan who watches everything I can wrestling. Weekly television, pay-per-views, international shows if possible, indies when I can. So when Sports Illustrated publishes an article, I'm not looking for validation, I'm looking for honesty. And what bothers me about this article isn't bias, it's detachment. And the article feels like it was written about wrestling, not by someone living inside it week to week. So let's be honest about 2025. This was not a legendary year when it comes to wrestling. This was not a golden year. This was not a year of dominant storytelling. It was a patchwork year. Across industry, there were injuries that forced pivots, long-term story arcs collapsing because of it, and promotion leaning on reliability instead of risk. That context is everything because awards don't exist in a vacuum. They exist inside how fans actually experience the year. So, welcome in everyone. We're going to go through the 2025 Sports Illustrated Wrestling Awards that were announced this week. And we're going to go category by category. We're going to talk about what they selected, their thoughts as far as we know, and what I think of it. And that's it. No crying, no this, no nothing. Just my honest opinion. So let's start with what they talked about in their article, and you can find their article in Sports Illustrated under the Takedown SI if you want to read it yourself. Now, they open up their article by saying wrestling in 2025 to them can be summed up in two words: cowboy shit, which immediately centers the entire year. Based on that statement alone, it's going to hang around Hangman, Adam Page, and all elite wrestling. That framing matters because once you declare a main character year, every award that follows starts leaning towards that conclusion, consciously or not. But here's the truth. Hangman did not define 2025. I don't think he might have stabilized it as far as we can see. But that's on one side of the area. But regardless, it's a different thing. So we're going to go bit by bit. So let's start with storyline of the year, which they said it was awarded to Hangman Adam Page redemption arc. Now, they noted on their article how they reviewed this. They had 7 people or so. They had a rubric point system or whatever. Whoever gets the most point gets the win. And they wrote it in. There were no options given to them ahead of time or something like that. It's very not clear how they chose the winners. And it's not clear what each category should be represented. Now, if you do an awards, and I've done awards in my past, not in wrestling, but in other things in my profession, you wanna, not only for you, the jury, and the nominees, but also for the audience that wants to know how you got there, is to clearly state what each category represents. What is it supposed to be? You have to tell me what this category symbolizes. What are you looking into this category? How do you select the process? Otherwise, people are going to question it, like what is happening right now. What are the derivatives that makes you decide who wins this category? So, anyway, Sports Illustrated named Hangman Adam Page redemption arc as a storyline of the year, and on paper, maybe the conclusion makes sense. but the why matters more than the what. When you strip the story down to its reality, the question becomes simple: who else was there? With Darby Allin committing to Everest and stepping away from the title picture, and Will Ospreay sidelined with a major injury, AEW's list of believable main event options shrank pretty fast, heading into All in Texas. The visual, when they talk about All in Texas, the visual, the location, obviously, and the urgency all pointed in one direction. If you're running a stadium show in Texas, the Cowboy winning is the safest and most logical choice. That doesn't mean the story was bad. It means the story just was situational. Hangman's real long-term narrative has always been with Swerve Strickland before all of this happened. And that story still is unresolved and ongoing. Meanwhile, Jon Moxley's reign never truly felt like it was destined to end with Hangman. It always felt like it was meant to conclude with Darby Allin. What we got instead was a necessary pivot and not a natural endpoint. And zooming out even further, this is where the award itself starts to feel hollow. If we're being honest, 2025 was a weak year for world title storytelling across the board for all promotions. Stories were short or fragmented and rarely following through to their fullest emotional potential. Nothing in AEW or even in WWE truly dominated this year in a way that felt unforgettable. In a few years from now, we're gonna remember John Cena's retirement or this storyline or whatever, but it's still gonna feel, we won't know the details the way we do for great storytelling, like CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre last year. So that's why for me, personally, if we need to pick straws at this point, the most effective storytelling of the year wasn't even a title story. Honestly, the best thing I can think of, it was CM Punk versus Seth Rollins. The story, which played on injuries before SummerSlam, adapted without rushing, and maintained some emotional tension between these two, because these two are some of the very best in doing that. And it to today, it still continues to breathe. It didn't need a definite ending to remain compelling, and that continuity is something no world title story truly achieved in 2025. So while Hangman's redemption works as a payoff, calling it storyline of the year feels less like crowning excellence and more like selecting the cleanest option in a year full of unfinished ideas. And honestly, that distinction matters when it comes to this category. Now, rivalry of the year. Hangman Adam Page was awarded rivalry of the year with Jon Moxley. So this category now circles back to the core issue with the storyline of the year discussion. And you have to start asking what actually qualifies as a rivalry. Sports Illustrated named Hangman Adam Page versus Jon Moxley as rivalry of the year, framing it as a long, simmering, company-defining feud. But in reality, this wasn't a rivalry. It was a 6-week build-up, created out of necessity due to omitted people. With the real long-term contenders against Moxley unavailable, Darby Allin out, and Will Ospreay again injured, AEW needed a credible, emotionally resonant challenger quickly. Hangman was the best option at that time, not because of an existing blood feud with Moxley, but because of his standing within the company and his connection to the fan base. That's them doing a solution, but not a rivalry. A true rivalry, to me at least, lives over time. It bleeds into promos when the opponent isn't in the ring. It hijacks unrelated segments. It creates tension that exists even when the match isn't scheduled yet. Hangman and Moxley didn't orbit each other for months. They didn't obsess over one another. They didn't reshape weekly television around their conflict in AEW. They collided because the timing demanded it, and then it ended. And that's the key distinction. Now, again, if we're talking about actual rivalry in 2025, something rooted in personal animosity, continuity, and emotion memory, then for me, obviously, it goes back to CM Punk and Seth Rollins. Even with Seth's fake injury, that rivalry still existed in the audience mind, still has an unresolved tension, still has a clear emotional through line, and couldn't easily be resumed and when Seth returns, if they wanted to. That's what a rivalry is. Something that doesn't disappear just because the match isn't happening this month. So yes, I do have to disagree with Sports Illustrated here. Hangman versus Moxley delivered a strong match and a necessary conclusion, but calling it rivalry of the year inflates a short-term booking decision into something it simply was not. And again, that distinction matters. Heel turn of the year. They gave it to Naomi. Oh, here comes this WWE guy telling, I'm going to say he agrees with it. Now let's go look into the category though. Now we're going to go into the details of this category. This category is where definitions matter. And unfortunately, this is where I think Sports Illustrated wasn't paying attention and they're getting sloppy with their work. Now, a heel turn and a heel run are not the same thing. They never have been. A heel turn is the moment, the betrayal, the shock, the ruptured in the trust, the aftertalk about that moment. And a heel run is everything that follows after that moment. The consistency, the character work, the development of that character work as a heel, and the execution. Sports Illustrated awarded the heel turn of the year to Naomi, and to be clear, in my honest opinion, Naomi's heel run has been excellent. The character work has been layered. The motivation has been clear with the proceed with caution. The presentation, the confidence, and the in-ring demeanor all evolved in a way that elevated her far beyond where she's been previously. Her Money in the Bank cash-in and overall gimmick shift was masterclass example of how to capitalize on a turn. But the turn itself for Naomi, that moment, did not redefine the year. That's where the distinction matters when it comes to the definition of this award. Meanwhile, the most obvious choice, and the shocking not selected choice, was John Cena turning heel. Even though his heel run was poorly executed, that moment will be talked about for decades. It will be talked as equal, if not more, than when Hulk Hogan turned on everyone and formed the NWO. Regardless how the run played out, fans will always remember the night Cena turned on Cody and the audience. That image, that face, when he hugs Cody, is permanent in most fans' minds from this day forward. Cena's heel run may have been uneven, rush, and outright bad at sometimes, but his turn is echoed into wrestling history. Naomi's legacy from this year will be remembered differently, not for the moment she turned, but for how well she performed after it. And that's not a knock on her, it's just the truth of her heel run. So yes, Naomi deserves recognition, but this award wasn't for best heel run. It was, or best even gimmick evolution. It was for heel turn of the year, keyword being turn. And if we're being honest with wrestling history, that honor for this belongs to John Cena. Because moments live forever, and execution, no matter how strong, lives in the context of the moment that created it. That's the difference. Best on the mic. They named Toni Storm as the best in mic of 2025. And to be fair, within the women's division, that argument holds weight. Toni Storm is very entertaining. Her timing is sharp, her cadence is deliberate, her commitment to the timeless movie star persona is absolute. But here's where I start to push a little back. At this point, her promos, after all these years under the timeless Toni Storm, feels less like emotional conversations and more like commercials built around sexual innuendos. They're funny, don't get me wrong, they get reactions and they are memorable, but they rarely dig deeper than surface level provocations. The character hits the beats, the crowd laughs, and the segment moves on. And that's fine to a point. When you're presented as a timeless old Hollywood performer, someone inspired by cinema, tragedy, and melodrama, there should be emotional depth behind the performance that she's doing. I'm still waiting for a more raw, vulnerable promo where her character cracks a little more, where the humor drops and we see why she is the way she is. That's next level mic work. Because when she expands the scope beyond the women's division and look at best mic across all of wrestling, there were performers this year who delivered far more layered emotional work. And I can list a few. We have MJF, obviously. Weaponized insecurity and arrogance of him. Some of the best. We obviously have CM Punk as well, who always sounds genuinely wounded and resentful. We have Seth Rollins blurring the lines between performance and instability. We had Kevin Owens earlier in the year, who was deliberately grounded and believable rage, but because he was injured before WrestleMania, maybe he gets omitted. And of course, the other one we get for a potential mic work is John Cena himself. And what I mean about that is his post-heel run work. He cut one of the most cold, calculated, and cutthroat promos of his entire career at Brussels. This first time he showed up after his heel turn. You guys will know it because it's the one that he talks about a certain fan, and it's a kid, and they point the camera at the kid. The one that he says, "What do you get? What do you that?" And you get nothing. That was cold. And it was the moment everyone was waiting for because they didn't know how would John Cena deliver himself as a heel. All these guys' promos weren't just entertaining, they always reveal something about this themselves. So while Toni Storm may be the most entertaining talker in the women's division, calling her the best on the mic overall for the year 2025 feels premature. The performance is excellent, but the emotional ceiling hasn't been tested yet for her. She still has more that she can do. And for an award, I guess we can say is this big since it's Sports Illustrated. Again, the distinction matters. Best in the ring. I want to say this one by saying something important. Because context matters once again when it comes to awards. Now, one of the head people for this thing, as well as take down Sports Illustrated, is John Alba. I respect John Alba. I followed his work for a long time, and I genuinely enjoyed his involvement as one of the hosts of Living the Gimmick podcast from years ago. That's why this pick stood out for me, because the thought process behind this feels very different from an analytical lens he used to bring to that podcast in years previously. And that shift is noticeably throughout this article with all the other people he worked in with this article. If you're going to create divisions of criteria based on how WWE chose to structure their business instead of how wrestling is actually experienced by fans week to week, that disconnect will show in your writing. And in this case, it absolutely does. Because when Sports Illustrated presents awards like this, you cannot afford to make fans feel like they're being talked at instead of listened to. Especially not in a year where engagement, consistency, and trust mattered more than star power. And that brings us to this award itself. How is Will Ospreay, with all due respect, best in the ring for 2025 when he was injured halfway through the year? Yes, Ospreay is phenomenal. He had an amazing 2024. That's not a debate. But he wrestled 26 matches. And while those matches were good, none of them felt like a peak of his overall bodywork. If anything, like I said, 2024 was the year where Ospreay felt undeniable, where every match felt essential, urgent, and must watch. 2025 did not feel like that for Will Ospreay. So if this award is meant to represent the wrestler who best embodied in-ring excellence across an entire calendar year, then availability and consistency have to matter in this award criteria. Otherwise, this award stops reflecting performance and starts reflecting reputation. And that's where the alternative becomes impossible to ignore. So for me, IYOSKY worked essentially the entire year. She didn't miss time. She didn't disappear from television. She didn't cool off. More importantly, crowds moved with her. They reacted to her pacing. They followed her storytelling. They adjusted their energy based on her control of the match. That is in-ring mastery for this year. She wasn't just executing moves. She was conducting the rooms week after week against different opponents in different match structures without needing a gimmick or safety net. And I'll be completely honest, as a fan, none of Will Ospreay matches this year made me feel like I had to tune in to watch AEW. They were good, but they weren't appointment viewing. IYOSKY's matches consistently were. So this award doesn't feel like it reflects 2025. It feels like it delayed acknowledgement of what Ospreay did last year. And when awards stop matching the year they're supposed to represent, fans don't feel informed. They feel dismissed. That's not about brand loyalty. That's about credibility. And credibility is exactly what this category needed more. Anyway, Breakout Wrestler of the Year goes with Kyle Fletcher. This is probably one of the few categories where I don't feel like the need to fight the pick. Kyle Fletcher being named Breakout Wrestler of the Year is obviously justified. This guy's been evolving for years. Not for years, for the past couple of years. If you took where he was a year or two ago, he felt like a talented piece waiting for direction. Good in-ring work, reliable, but not clearly defined beyond being very solid. In 2025 and late 2024, that changed. His alignment with the Don Callis family wasn't just a comedic shift. The shave head, the sharper presentation, the more aggressive in-ring approach gave Fletcher an identity that finally matched his ability. He wrestled with intent. And he logged over 40 or so television matches, which mattered. The kind of workload isn't accidental. It's trust that AEW had with him. He anchored mid-card programs. He elevated opponents. He carried responsibilities without losing crowd engagement. His cage match with Will Ospreay set the tone early, and his TNT Championship win over Dustin Rhodes felt like a legitimate step forward rather than a courtesy reign. Even in defeat, particularly in the all-out main event against Hangman, Fletcher came across as someone knocking on the door and filling the spot. That's what a breakdown actually looks like. He didn't just improve, he's graduating into a main event status. So yeah, as a breakout performer, this one lands. He evolved significantly from what he was. He earned his positioning. and now he feels like a real piece of AEW's future rather than a background player. So definitely deserved. Let's go for Comeback Performer of the Year. This award feels a little decided with a very specific thought process in mind. Ilya Dragunov won Comeback of the Year largely because of what he did in a very short window time. After returning from a torn ACL, Dragunov didn't ease back into the ring, and he came in swinging. And within 2 months, he capped on winning the United States Championship, and now he's running a strong open challenge stretch for the past couple weeks on SmackDown. From a purely in-ring standpoint, the logic is clear. He has immediate impact, high-level match quality, and after coming back, he barely showed any visible ring dust. Ring rust, not dust. Sorry. That's the case for Dragunov, and it's a strong one. But this is where we need to start thinking about it and seeing, is this the best comeback of the year? If comeback performer is only about short-term match output, then yes, Dragunov fits perfectly. But if the category is about full weight of a comeback, then there's another name that deserves far more consideration. And this goes back again in understanding what is the criteria for these awards, what is the verbiage that makes us understand why you selected the people you selected. And if there's in the future a clarity for these awards in the future, like you actually give the readers, the fans, the background for these awards and how you came about choosing it, then maybe, again, this back and forth doesn't happen, or maybe misunderstanding. Anyway, while if it's not about time's length and it's more about the impact of the comeback, that impact, then to me, AJ Lee is the return that made more impact than Dragunov. And it's not because she did more matches. It's more like how people reacted to her return and how the crowd was behind her. She returned nearly after 10 years being away from the ring, and she was in excellent shape. She barely showed any ring rust, just like Ilya Dragunov. And she worked with the division toe to toe. Not only did she come back in excellent shape, but she proved she could still go toe to toe with the modern roster in a division that has evolved dramatically since she last competed in it. Her involvement involved war games and her tag team mixed gender match with her husband. She was able to adapt, work conditionally, and make fans still stick behind her. That kind of return carries a different kind of difficulty, a decade of ring evolution, a faster, more physical women's division, immense fans expectations, and barely no margin of error. While Dragunov comeback was defined by immediate in-ring excellence, AJ Lee's was defined by longevity, adaptation, and emotional weight for the fans. Dragunov won because the award prioritized short-term performance over long-term significance. That's not wrong, but it's a choice. And if the criteria had been expanded beyond match quality alone, this conversation might have looked differently. Both comebacks mattered. Only one fit the narrow lane this award stated. So either option is fine. The question is, what is the definition of this damn award? Like, if it was better defined, maybe it'll make more sense. Which one is clearer? But maybe next year. Tag Team of the Year. Now, this one is the category where I struggle the most to understand the decision. Only because tag team's been weird. FTR winning the tag team year feels hard to justify when you actually looked at how the year played out on television. Yes, they are one of the best pure teams of their generation. Yes, their fundamentals are elite. That's not debatable. The issue is visibility and impact for the year. For the most of 2025, FTR were barely present on main AEW programming outside of their feud involving Adam Copeland and Christian Cage, which was relevant and effective. They largely existed on the margins, tucked away on Collision, and rarely positioned at the heartbeat of the division. Tag Team of the Year should reflect consistent presence, division leadership, and sustained relevance. And that just wasn't the case here for this year for them. Now, I'll be fair. Let's be fair now. WWE's tag division in 2025 was rough. And it's been rough. There's no sugarcoating that. The lack of long-term commitment to tag wrestling makes it understandable why WWE teams weren't seriously considered for this award, and rightfully so. But that leads to a much bigger question. Was this award only evaluated through WWE and AEW? Because if that's the case, that's a massive blind spot. Because where's TNA Wrestling in this conversation? Where's Ring of Honor? And more importantly, where are the Hardys? Yes, Matt and Jeff Hardy have slowed down physically. That's a reality. But over the past several months, they have still been working hard across, whether it's TNA, their NXT appearances, House of Glory, and even other platforms beyond that. They haven't just been wrestling, they've been representing. At this point, the Hardys are essentially spokespersons for TNA, leading credibility, visibility, and legitimacy to the promotion while still demonstrating that what tag team psychology, timing, and storytelling are supposed to look like. They are actively showing younger teams how tag wrestling should function, even at this stage in their careers. The fact that they weren't even listed as runner-ups is baffling. So when FTR wins this award, it doesn't feel like a celebration of the best tag team year. It feels like a default selection made in a narrowed field. And that's the problem. If Tag Team of the Year only exists inside a WWE versus AEW bubble, then the award isn't reflecting the industry. It's reflecting convenience. And tag team wrestling deserves better than that. Match of the Year. Sports Illustrated named the triple threat between IYOSKY, Rhea Ripley, and Bianca Belair at WrestleMania 41 as Match of the Year. And to be clear, it was an excellent match. The execution was sharp, the pacing was fast, the transitions were creative, and the stakes were real. From a purely technical standpoint, there's nothing wrong with this pick. But Match of the Year isn't just about execution, it's about attention, it's about emotional investment, it's about whether fans felt like they had to see it happen in real time. And for me, personally, that match was AJ Styles versus John Cena at Crown Jewel. The match was just another great bout. It was a callback between the two, a reminder of a rivalry that helped define an era of a time, brought back with a purpose. The pacing was deliberate, not rushed. Every beat landed because both men trusted the moment and trusted the audience to stay with them. And make no mistake, this was a match the fans asked for. Whether people want to admit it or not, the demand was there. And when it finally happened, it felt earned. Cena in particular gave everything he had in this match. Throughout his entire final run, this was the performance where it felt like he left nothing on the table. That's what elevated this match. Now, here's where the category really loses credibility for me. If we're talking about match of the year across all professional wrestling, the lack runner-up diversity is glaring. Where was TNA wrestling in this discussion? There are great matches that they've done, whether it was the Santana match in the fall or even the X Division Championship match between Leon Slater and Javon Evans in Bound for Glory. No acknowledgement whatsoever. That was a great match. Leon Slater and Javon Evans are future like cruiserweight level type of wrestlers, showcasing speed, innovation, and risk taking at a level that deserves at least a runner-up consideration. And even within WWE, how does Rhea Ripley versus Io Sky at WWE Evolution in the summer not enter the conversation as a potential runner-up? That match carried intensity and the crowd engagement that rivaled anything else this year. So while WrestleMania Triple Threat is a worthy technical winner, the conversation around the match of the year feels a little narrowed. For me, AJ Styles versus John Cena wasn't just a great match, it was a moment fans followed, asked for, and remembered. And when we talk about match of the year, again, the distinction matters. Oh boy. Show of the year. This is the category where I genuinely stopped and said, okay, or what? Sports Illustrated named AEW Double or Nothing as Show of the Year. And while the show absolutely had high points, calling it the best beginning to end program of 2025 ignores what fans exactly experience across the year. Because if we're being honest, WWE Evolution was the most complete show of the year, and it wasn't close. Evolution didn't rely on one or two standout matches to carry the night. From the opening bell to the closing segment, the shows had consistent pacing, clear match purpose, strong crowd engagement, and zero dead space. The women of that division didn't show up that night, they set the standard as always. The main event between IYOSKY and Rhea Ripley was phenomenal on its own intense physical and emotional charged way. And just when it felt like the perfect cap of the night, Naomi's Money in the Bank cash in detonates the building and reframed the entire show in one moment. That's how you end a great program with impact that carries forward. If we're ranking shows strictly by fan experience, the order becomes pretty clear. After Evolution, I honestly put Elimination Chamber next between John Cena's heel turn, two strong chamber matches for both divisions, and even the Sami Zayn versus Kevin Owens delivering when it mattered. That show felt consequential. Things changed because of it. And if we're expanding the conversation beyond WWE and AEW, which we should be, Bound in Glory absolutely deserves mention as a contender. It wasn't perfect, but it was focused, energized, and representative of promotion moving forward and evolving with purpose. That's the key difference. AEW programming in 2025, including Double or Nothing, was mixed. Some great moments, some great matches, but also uneven pacing, tonal whiplash, and stretches that didn't feel essential. And to be fair, WWE had its own inconsistency throughout the year as well. That's why, to me, WWE Evolution stands out. It didn't feel patched together. It felt reactionary. It didn't feel reactionary. It felt intentional. So when Double or Nothing gets crowned Show of the Year, it feels less like a reflection of the best overall program and more like a highlight-based decision. And Show of the Year shouldn't be about highlights. It should be about flow, consistency, and how a night feels when you watch it live. By that standard, Evolution earned it. Mercedes Moné gets named as Female Wrestler of the Year. And depending how you define the award, I can understand the argument. If this category is about collecting championships, crossing promotions, elevating indie scenes, and executing a globe-trotting narrative, then yes, that case makes sense. Mercedes Moné had a massive gimmick year. The belt collector presentation, the international appearances, and the visibility she brought to multiple promotions all mattered from a branding and business standpoint. She helped shine a spotlight on moments wrestling beyond a single company. But here is where the award loses clarity. This category is called the Best Female Wrestler of the Year, not the best gimmick, not the best narrative, and not the best brand ambassador. And when we judge strictly for wrestling performance across the year, Mercedes Moné it was not the best woman wrestler in 2025. Not across the industry, and honestly, maybe not even within the division in All Elite Wrestling. Again, that distinction matters. Because when you look at consistency, match output, crowd connections, and week to week trust, one name to me stands above the rest, and that's IYOSKY again. IYOSKY started strong in January and never let up. She worked the full calendar year, she delivered in high pressure matches, and she adapted in different opponents and match structures. And most importantly, the crowd was with her the entire time. Fans didn't just respect her work, they reacted to it. Social media disclosure around IYOSKY remained overwhelmingly positive throughout the year, and she consistently generated buzz without needing a reinvention of a traveling narrative to keep attention. She didn't disappear, she didn't coast, she didn't rely on presentation to carry her. She wrestled. So while Mercedes Moné year was impressive in scope, it was impressive because of what the story was, not because of unmatched in-ring dominance within a single promotion or across the main roster landscape. And that's the core issue here. If the award is truly about the best female wrestler, then it has to prioritize consistency, performance, crowd trust, and sustained excellence. By those standards, 2025 belonged to IYOSKY. And that's why this pick feels more like a narrative win than a wrestling one. Male Wrestler of the Year. Obviously, based on the way I started this video, Hangman Adam Page is the Male Wrestler of the Year. And while Hangman absolutely had a strong 2025, I don't think he had the best one. The key issue here isn't talent, it's context. Hangman's rise in 2025 came largely as a reaction to circumstance once again, with major names sidelined by injury or unavailable. AEW needed someone reliable, emotionally credible, and already established with the fan base. Hangman fit that role perfectly. But fitting a role isn't the same thing as driving the year. Much of Hangman's prominence felt like a necessity. A stand-in when others were removed from the equation. He delivered when asked, but the year didn't revolve around his momentum as much as it revolved around the filling gaps left by injuries and stalled plans. Now, compare that with Seth Rollins. Before his very real injury in the fall, Rollins was arguably the most compelling male performer of the entire calendar year. He wasn't just wrestling well, he was controlling attention. The fake injury angle leading into SummerSlam is the perfect example. That storyline, blurred reaction, and fiction pulled fans into speculation, dominated conversation week after week, especially with division, and made it every appearance feel important. It wasn't about championships for him. It wasn't about match count. It was about the engagement. Rollins combined performance and storytelling in a way that consistently grabbed the audience, even knowing it was a work. Fans leaned in because the presentation felt unpredictable and layered. Now, that's Male Wrestler of the Year energy to me. Hangman delivered strong matches and a solid arc, I guess. But Seth Rollins drove narratives. He dictated conversations. He made people tune in, argued online, and questioned what was real. And that's the difference. So while Hangman Adam Page deserved recognition for stepping up during a turbulent year, calling him the top male performer of 2025 feels like a rewarding reliability over impact. For me, the wrestler who best combined story, performance, and audience investment throughout the year before injury forced the pause was Seth Rollins. And that's why this award doesn't quite land. I think we're almost there. We are now to one of the last and obvious big categories, and the whole point, everyone's going crazy over an opinionated article. Sports Illustrated named All Elite Wrestling as Promotion of the Year for 2025. And this is where I fundamentally disagree with this evaluation. Because when you strip away individual matches and isolated moments, AEW's overall programming in 2025 was inconsistent, both in storytelling and in how the talent was elevated across the board. That doesn't mean AEW had a bad year, not at all. It means they had a fragmented one. Storylines often started strong but failed to maintain the momentum for them. Talent was elevated in short bursts, then cooled off without follow-through. Major angles felt reactive rather than planned. And when we're talking about promotion of the year, consistency is the baseline, not the bonus. What makes it harder to accept this is honestly seeing better overall structure and growth this year from both WWE and TNA wrestling. And that's saying something because neither of those companies were perfect either. In fact, WWE was arguably still on a down year creatively in 2025. Yet even then, their television felt more directionally focused than AEW's. Stories had clearer lanes, characters' motivation were easier to track, and major moments felt connected rather than isolated. AEW's, meanwhile, continued to struggle with driven, cohesive television storytelling. This isn't new. The company's strongest period was its first 2 years, even 3 years. Then direction, identity, and urgency were clear. That's when it was clear. Since then, it feels like a cycle of mid-rise momentums followed by stagnation, then reset, then a repeat. That's not what promotion of the year looks like. Now, let's talk once again about the biggest omission in this category. TNA Wrestling. The fact that TNA Wrestling secured a major television deal on a large cable network should have completely reshaped this conversation. That doesn't happen by accident. That's not luck. That's the result of sustained effort, smart positioning, and rebuilding credibility over time. And yet, there's barely any analysis of how they did it. No deep dive into it, what changes they made internally, how they stabilized their brand, why networks saw value in them again. That's a massive business story. Arguably the biggest growth indicator of any promotion in 2025. And it's largely ignored. That's the problem. That's the big problem. Because promotion of the year shouldn't just be about match quality. It should be about momentum, growth, visibility, and trajectory. Right now, AEW hasn't shown clear signs of growth outside of its expectations surrounding Mercedes Moné and her title collective narrative. That's not quite the company-wide momentum we're looking for. That's a spotlight on just one performer. So when Sports Illustrated frames AEW's 2025 as a foundational rebuilding year, my response is simple. I'm open to seeing that what these foundations lead to, but it doesn't translate into stronger storytelling, clear identity, and online engagement that actually grows. Then what is the point? Promotion of the year should reward who moved forward, not who stayed busy. And in 2025, AEW stayed active, but TNA grew, and WWE stabilized. Again, that distinction matters. Now, they did something else. They had a 2025 Legacy Award and they awarded it to John Cena. Obviously. This is one of the categories that it would obviously make sense that they shouldn't get it wrong. The Legacy Award went to John Cena, deserved, necessary, and honestly unavoidable. At this point, there isn't much left to argue about Cena's place in wrestling history. His retirement in 2025 wasn't just the end of a career; it was the closing of an era that shaped professional wrestling for nearly 2 decades. Cena wasn't just a top guy; he was the guy during the darkest era of WWE. He carried WWE through transitions most stars would never survive. Post Attitude Era skepticism, fan backlash at his peak, the shift to a global corporate product, and eventually into a modern era where part time legends became the norm. Through it all, Cena remained a constant during all these changes. And what made his final year so compelling wasn't perfection, it was emotional. The heel turn, controversial as it was, added complexity to a goodbye tour that could have been easily been safe and predictable. The tap out loss of Gunther, the Mitt's reaction, the debates, all of it reinforced that Cena's career was never simple, never universally loved, and never boring. That's legacy. It wasn't just the championships, though 17 world titles speaks for itself. It was connection, the visibility, the way his presence elevated everyone around him, even when fans pushed back against him. You saw it in the tributes that crossed promotional lines. You saw it in reaction from wrestlers who grew up watching him. You saw it in the crowd the night he left his gear in the ring. This wasn't nostalgia bait, this was an acknowledgement. And unlike some of the other awards in this article, this one didn't feel curated or strategic. It felt human. So while I disagree with much of the Sports Illustrated 2025 award breakdown, the Legacy Award stands apart. John Cena earned it, not just for what he did in 2025, but for what he meant to the industry for 20 plus years. No spin needed, no counter argument required. That's legacy. So after breaking down every category, storyline, rivalry, heel turn, mic work, in-ring performance, breakdown, comeback, tag team matches, so on and so forth, here's the truth. For the most part, this takedown by Sports Illustrated article just, to me, doesn't hold up. But that's my opinion. And I'm not saying that as someone pretending to be the media. I'm just saying that as a fan. A fan who watches the shows. A fan who feels when stories stall. And a fan who knows when momentum is real and when it's being manufactured on paper. If anyone involved with this article wants to explain why these selections were made, you're welcome to. Because what we got instead was something very polished, very clean, and very dry. A lot of fluff. A lot of corporate safe language. Very little actual take. This didn't read like a wrestling criticism. It read like tactical positioning. And the most disappointing part, the near total omission of TNA wrestling. That's heartbreaking. After all the work they've done, that's very heartbreaking. TNA has been grinding for 2 straight years, rebuilding credibility, stabilizing their product, working talent correctly, and then landing a major television deal on a large scale cable network, which doesn't happen by accident. That is an example of growth. That is a business success story, and it barely gets acknowledged. Meanwhile, we're asked to accept that almost every major win in 2025 belonged to All Elite Wrestling, in a year where no company truly had their house in order. Let's be honest, WWE had a monumental year in 2024. That's why they clean up in last year's awards. They earned it. But 2025 was messy for everyone. Injuries, pivot stories, short term solutions, missed opportunities. You cannot tell me that this year was so one sided that AEW's dominance nearly every monumental earned every monumental category. That doesn't reflect what fans actually lived through week to week. So, in all silliness, so congratulations, I guess, to AEW. You won a lot of awards this year. But guess what? Here's the part that nobody wants to say out loud. It's not over. 2026 is no longer about potential for AEW. It's now about delivery after these awards. Because whether it's fair or not, Sports Illustrated just put more eyes on your product. Now, those aren't guaranteed eyes, those are potential eyes. And potential only matters if you capitalize on it. So that means for 2026, AEW, no half-baked storylines, no pay-per-views where blood replaces stakes, no coasting on banger culture without narrative payoff. You actually have to play game now. Because if 2026 looks like another year of inconsistency, stall momentum, and unfinished ideas, then these 2025 awards will age terribly. And when the 2026 article drops in 2027, people will remember exactly how confident these writers were a year too early. Just like people are doing now with WWE's down year. So go ahead, celebrate for the next couple weeks. Keep subtweeting. Keep calling critics, trolls, or fans irrelevant. Because when January 1st hits, it's time to show up AEW. Because credibility doesn't come from trophies or paper. It comes from what fans remember. And fans remember everything. This has been the Tea Drop. No fluff. No blind loyalty. No pretending. Just the work.